Hello, 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 everybody. My name is Zach Hardwick, and thank you for tuning in to Chats with Zach, which is brand spanking new podcast here, which we'll be talking about the little micro series on the film industry, and in particular for this first episode, we'll be going over the film industry of Germany and kind of delve a little bit deeper into its origins. We'll talk a little bit about the historical aspects of it throughout the last century or so, a little bit more, and just the fascinating world of German cinema and film. So before we dive in, though, we'll be talking about and going over these main different aspects of the actual industry itself. So, we're talking a little bit about the inception of Germany, not only of German film, of course, but to understand German film, you need to understand Germany. So, the inception and history of the German film industry, as well as the German Empire, then going from the Weimar, and then going to the Third Reich, and then so on and so forth. Then after that, we dive in a little bit deeper into movies themselves, looking at the evolution of films, how they evolved, changed, artistic viewpoints, standards, budget-wise, all that kind of information to see how the growth and evolution of the film took place. Talking about the modern industry, we're talking about the big ballers, of course, of German film directing and producing and cinematography and all that kind of aspects, and see the trends and look at how deep the industry has grown since its inception and where I can see it going in the future. Talking about the streaming platforms and the rating system of Germany and how it all compares to our own here in the United States. And last but not least, be looking at just a little conclusion, recap on what we talked about today, and then go on from there. All right, so here's a little history lesson for you. German Empire and the Weimar Republic. So before the German Empire, there was just a bunch of states that were all kind of just there, not a lot of like territory. The Federation was pretty weak at most until a guy named Otto von Bismarck strolled along and was like, hey, we should all unite and grow our strength and become one of the most powerhouse nations in all of continental Europe. So, like, sure, let's do that. So, with rapid industrialization, they were able to achieve a new kind of standard and a new prestige on the whole continent. But with that, with the hard power, you got to take the soft power. So, one thing they did, they looked to their neighbors, France, who were the Lumiere brothers, inventors of the actual photo camera and like some early cinematography, were making movies. And the Germans thought, wow, if they can make movies, so can we. So, Germany's true artistic films started to debut around the 1910s and the early first decade of the 1900s, with these films kind of being more on the experimental side because this is all brand new technology for everyone. With that, its initial kind of inception of these early films that were more of our artistic period pieces established like one of the first large scale film studios in Europe, which is still standing today and still produces a lot of films each year, which is called Studio Babelsberg. And in a way, it was kind of a forerunner slash direct competition to what we know here in America as our Hollywood. Hollywood was kind of started around the same year, kind of all producing similar films and kind of exploring this newer technology that was just been released. These films are definitely visually striking. I've seen like some of the first films that Germany has released, and they are just interesting to say the least. But a lot of them do kind of reflect the artistic expressionism of the time. This wasn't only visible through film; this is visible through culture, visible through the actual finer arts as well. So with this new age of cinema, the fine arts world kind of engulfed that and introduced it into cinema. And this was primarily popular around and before the World War One time. And then another interesting thing I found during my research was that the earliest form of cinema, which is Kiantop, was actually a way for business owners to drive up more business because you have this new kind of phenomenon of sorts being available to people. They would draw attention. So what owners would do, if you owned a pub or a bar or a restaurant, you'd just pull up and you see these films, but also it would increase their own business as well, which is quite interesting. These were popular in front of stores and then city blocks and whatnot. Moving on from that, we kind of go into what I consider one of the prime times for the golden age of Germany, and this all kind of happened after World War One. World War One, in a way, as a little side note, was the war to end all wars. No one really expected it to flare up, and no one really expected a sequel, but it did happen. So, in wartime Germany focused kind of not as much, obviously, on the arts as much as wartime. I mean, they were building these new technology as far as warfare goes. They're experimenting with chemical warfare. They had all these new things going on. But one thing that was present, was German propaganda films. These were widely available, supporting the fatherland, and they were basically pumping both soldier and citizen alike full of this kind of new zest for the fatherland. And these films were actually called Vaterland films, which literally just means German films. But I think it's quite interesting how during wartime, the shift is so fast. And after World War One, of course, we all know how that ends up. Germany is devastated. The economy goes down the drain, and they really need to restart. So when the Weimar Republic comes into power after the fall of the German Empire, it's a whole culture shift for film. So this is kind of its early golden age, and I wouldn't say till recently it's kind of re-sparked revival as far as these kind of films go. One of the most influential films of all time, and I think if you look at any single top 100 films ever, this movie is bound to appear. It'd be somewhere on the list. Is Metropolis, which was released in 1927. This film alone is just kind of an interesting, unique dystopian future world that kind of set the stage for current sci-fi films as well, and it's just regarded as a masterpiece. And it's directed by Fritz Lang, and this is not a cheap movie by any means. Because of the Weimar Republic and its inflation and its economy being so bad, we don't know the exact cost of what it would be to film it, but it estimated about 1.3 million US dollars to create back then. Adjusted for inflation, that'd be upward of $24 million, which is a expensive movie, especially only 7 or 8 years down the road from down the road from the war, World War II, but also from trying to rekindle what was lost in World War One. Uh, Along with this classic movie, of course, you have another one which is kind of explores the Germanic folk tale, Brothers Grimm esque monsters that much of Europe is known to love, and that kind of is a take on Dracula. So the film Nosferatu is just a classic monster film, definitely a period piece of the time. It was also released in this golden era, and it kind of focuses heavy on just like the humanity and just kind of putting fear into people. But Nosferatu is more well known today if you ever watch SpongeBob SquarePants, because he makes an occasional appearance, which is just quite interesting to say the least. Moving on from here, we kind of shift gears. The Weimar Republic doesn't end up working so well because, of course, a man with a mustache. Nazi Germany and the Third Reich definitely saw a decrease in creativity in the films. Now is the time back to propaganda films. They're back and bigger than ever. So during the time, much of the artistic flair that it did exist was gone. Joseph Goebbels, who was the chief propagandist under Hitler and for the Third Reich, produced upwards of 50 plus propaganda films during this time. Most of them being about patriotism and they kind of harbored anti-Semitic values. As you can see, these two films here, both The Eternal Jew and Jude Seuss, depict a stereotypical view of a Jewish person during the time. And also, it's interesting to note that in The Eternal Jew, he has a sickle and hammer, which is also reflects the communism, which the Germans also hated. So Germans didn't really like a lot of people unless you were Aryan. So moving on from there, these what I found interesting during my research as well was that the fact that they were basically referred to their propaganda industry of these films as a ministry, which is kind of ministering their kind of agenda onto the German peoples and whoever may witness these films. So there was no free expression of these directors and writers and producers at the time. I know Joseph Goebbels actually tried reaching out to Fritz Lang on creating a similar film to Metropolis about the Nazi regime, but Fritz Lang rejected, and you already can know how that ended. I believe he ended up fleeing because he was afraid of the dire consequences which would follow. It's definitely a low point in the industry. Moving on a little bit here, World War II ends, the Third Reich collapses, and kind of left in turmoil again. So the German Empire was gone, the Third Reich was gone. Now Germany was just like, now what? We've been war torn twice over. How do we rebuild? So this reconstruction era of not only Germany but of the film industry was definitely needed. Many films started coming out, and they were called Trümmer films, which literally translates to rubble films. So within the rubble of a war-torn country, they were able to promote and support the economy by releasing these films. The film down here below is actually Where in Berlin is about a war veteran who returns to find his family, and after serving X amount of years in the military under Hitler, he finally has to go and search for his family, but his family is not always thrilled to see him back because of all the atrocities that took place. Um, it took a long while for the actual economy to bounce back, as after World War II happened, Germany was separated by the Allies with France, Great Britain, and of course the United States occupying one half, and then the other half went to the Soviet Union, which would forever kind of, during the Cold War at least, dampen the relationships and the tension in Germany. So this is also a low point for the industry as well because it didn't really bounce back as well as they wanted. They produced a lot of just quick, cheap melodramas. They tried to spark a Western kind of new fad similar to what we had here in the United States with John Wayne, but that didn't go anywhere. And so they just produced war films because there's a perfect scenery for it because all of Berlin and all of Germany was just devastated. But at the end of this kind of era, the only thing they were really producing with that were just mildly successful was just a bunch of educational films for students, and they released a bunch of softcore sex films and thought they would get a bunch of viewership on those, but really they did nothing. And then after this kind of period, we focus more on where we are today and where Germany, I would say, started its second climb. It's back up to that lost early golden era. And there's something I found interesting in my research. It's called the Oberhausen Manifesto, which is a group of 26 filmmakers that came together and were like, "Hey guys, we realize that our industry has hit a new low, and we want to rekindle our love and rekindle the country to produce more films. How can we do that?" And there's a famous saying. My German is bad, so I'll read the English translation, but the old cinema is dead. We believe in the new cinema. They realize that they can never regain what they've lost with the golden age, so might as well start anew, start fresh, clean slate. So they did. And Studio Babelsberg kind of took the lead on that with other top producing studios along with that, including Bavaria Film, UFA, and Constantin Film. As well as you might recognize some of these famous names of directors and composers. Roland Emmerich, he is basically most well known for his 80s and 90s sci-fi action films. You can see here we have Mel Gibson, The Patriot, Independence Day 1 and 2, Godzilla, Stargate. So a lot of just sci-fi horror and sci-fi like alien films as well. Then Wolfgang Peterson, he worked on Air Force One with Harrison Ford, and then of course one of the most well-known names on this list is Hans Zimmer, who is the famous composer who has worked on a bunch of stuff, including Inception. He's worked on Interstellar and many, many more. But I think that the modern industry has a lot of heavy hitters, and they can do a lot of help to kind of continue to bring Germany into the limelight. Just a brief side note, these are two films I really recommend you watch. They're both produced by Netflix, and I will mention later that Netflix is pumping a lot of money to help support German films and filmmakers. So these two films, All Quiet in the Western Front, is they actually a remake of the original American version that came out during, I believe, the 30s or 40s. And then Blood and Gold is more of like an action adventure film that kind of goes over not only action, but has like a heist movie of sorts. But it's both very good films. I would recommend watching them at some point. And then without that, we get to globalization. So the whole world's connected one way or the other. And through Germany's films, they have one of the single largest film festivals in the world. They get thousands upon thousands of submissions every year to the film festival. Pardon me. Then we go over to Berlin here. The Berlin International Film Festival is considered one of the big three in Europe. So the other two are, of course, the Cannes Film Festival, Cannes Film Festival in France. Then you have the Venice Film Festival, which is in Italy. And outside the three in Europe, there's also considered the big five in the whole world, which you throw in there Ontario in Canada. And of course, you also have Sundance Film Festival, which is in Utah here in the United States. There have been three films since Germany's reunification that have won an Oscar, which is pretty cool. Those of which include All Quiet in the Western Front, The Lives of Others, and Nowhere in Africa. And then without globalization, we kind of connect to streaming sites because most of these streaming sites are usable for most cases around the world, with its most popular one in Germany being Netflix. Like I said earlier, Netflix is pumping a lot of money, not only into the German film industry, but other film industries around the world, like Nigeria and other places. Netflix has one of the biggest subscriber counts in the whole country, and it seems to be super popular because a lot of films you can watch on Netflix are German films, like I mentioned earlier. Second biggest one being Amazon Prime, which rivals Netflix in a way for its rating system. I mean, Amazon's pretty universal, but they have a lot of good originals and shorts, and they seem to also be inclined for kind of giving money to German film workers in the film industry. Then on the left over here, you have two German only streaming sites. You have Wow, which is the biggest streaming platform in the country. It has a lot of also originals and dubbed versions of American movies on there. Then you have Join, which is also worth mentioning because they are the top four, but it is the lowest streaming count of the bunch. There's others, smaller independent ones as well that aren't as important, but another popular American one, which is used a lot, is YouTube. And then last but not least, we go over the rating system and how it compares to ours in America. So Germany's film rating system, known as the FSK, is the self-regulatory body of the movie industry. And this is categorized into 5 different age groups. So you have the white zero, which in our equivalents is like just a normal G. It's no age restrictions. Anyone can view this movie, and it's safe for the eyes of little ones. Then you have a yellow 6, which could be like our PG, which is basically there could be some, I don't know, underlying elements or themes that might be not appropriate for little ones. Then you have the green 12, which would be our version of PG-13. That could be language, violence, gore. That could be some sexual content or allude to sexual content in there. The blue 16, which is our version of R, which basically means that there might be some form of sexual conduct, severe and severe. There could be darker tones, elements. There could be a lot of like gore and violence and pretty harsh language. Then you have Red 18, which basically is our NC-17, which is actually, I found out in my research, is heavily, you need to have ID. It's basically you have an ID or you can't get in. There's no exceptions. So they are very into making sure that people who view this movie are of 18 and up. So now, just a little bit of conclusion before I end this is I just think Germany's film industry just has been through a lot. It's seen the fire and it's seen the flames and it's seen growth, and it's been on this roller coaster for the last century of just up and down and being war torn and having low points and high points. But now, looking forward, I think that Germany's film industry has nowhere to go but up. With Netflix and the support and just these film festivals and the introduction of just these German films being more globalized, I can see just massive growth happening in the next couple of years. And I looked, and there are at least 12 major films to be released by Germany for the rest of the year. So I'm excited to see how those do and see if they have a chance on the global scale, but as well. So thanks so much for listening. This has been Zach Chats. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you might be, and take care.